Welcome to the Zen of Reffing Roller Derby, Lesson 4, Game Concepts. I'm Axis of Stevel, the author of this training manual. I'm filming this on May 15th, 2018. The content of this presentation is up to date as of this recording. Should this video become obsolete or replaced by a newer version, I'll place a link on the screen to where you can find more information. As always, you can find the latest version of my full training manual at www.tinyurl.com/zenreffing. A quick disclaimer: the WFTDA, MRDA, and JRDA are not responsible for the content in my training manual or this presentation, nor do they make any claims as to the accuracy of their content. This lesson also assumes that you have at least a basic familiarity with how roller derby works. If you need a primer, stop now and go look at the show notes underneath this video on YouTube. I'll have a link to a great introductory video by Nin Lee. Go watch that, then come back and watch the rest of this video. Lesson 4, Game Concepts. This lesson is basically a set of introductory game concepts, as well as sort of a hodgepodge of useful information to know when you're officiating. So let's begin with game types. Regulation games. These are games that are played adhering to several documents with no deviation from these documents. These documents are the rules of flat track roller derby, the officiating procedures for the rules of flat track roller derby, the officiating cues, codes, and signals document, that's the one I've been talking about in the last few lessons. Most American, but not all international games must also adhere to the risk management guidelines. JRDA regulation games must also use the JRDA rules addenda. In regulation games, there's no maximum number of skaters. That's going to be important because we're going to talk about maximums in just a second. Participating teams, they're allowed to negotiate a maximum number of skaters in advance of a game. Now, non-regulation games are those games that are played that do deviate from the regulation game requirements. For example, 30-minute games. Sanctioned games, these are regulation games that now count towards rankings within a specific organization. For example, WFTA, WFTDA, that sanctions adult women's derby games. MRDA sanctions adult men's derby. JRDA sanctions junior, meaning 18 and younger derby. The JRDA also has divisions for females only, males only, and open divisions. In a sanctioned game, teams may have a maximum of 15 skaters. These skaters are drawn from what's called a charter. It's basically a list of skaters that are registered in advance with these organizations. So then when it comes time for a sanctioned game, they know exactly who the eligible people are that can be on the team. The reason they have the charter is to prevent people from basically jumping and playing for multiple leagues, going back and forth anytime they want to. Similar, I'm sure they do the same thing in, professional baseball. You can't play for the Yankees and the Mets at the same time. There are also a few other game types, such as strength factor challenge games or mock-sanctioned games, but these are uncommon, and we're not going to talk about them in this video. They basically run like sanctioned games. Let's talk about jammers, and in particular, lead jammers. A jammer has a helmet cover called the star, obviously denoted because it has large stars on the side of it. A jammer that's not wearing the star cover is considered an inactive jammer. A jammer wearing their cover is considered an active jammer. The term active jammer isn't used very much in derby, but inactive jammer certainly is. An inactive jammer cannot earn passes towards either scoring or towards earning their lead jammer status. Inactive lead jammers can also not call off the jam. There is an exception to this. If the lead jammer's helmet cover is removed through, just natural gameplay, it just kind of pops off on its own, or their helmet brushes against another skater and it kind of pops off, that's fine. Or if an opponent's action removes it, that also applies. The lead jammer in this case is still allowed to call off the jam. So if by some fluke, an opponent reaches out and grabs a jammer helmet cover and pulls it off, besides the fact that's an expulsion move and it's probably going to get the jam called off on its own, but the jammer is able to call off the jam at that point. An inactive jammer is allowed to leave the engagement zone. This is as opposed to blockers, which are bound to it. If you're not sure what the engagement zone is, we'll come back to that in a second. An inactive jammer may also put the jammer helmet cover back on their head to become active again. When we think of a jammer in a game and scoring points and doing all the fun stuff, they're basically an active jammer. An active jammer is just basically, since they're not wearing the helmet cover, they've given up certain privileges in the process, or certain perks, basically, being a jammer. Now, the lead jammer, as you're probably aware, is the jammer who's able to call off the jam, ending play early. The lead jammer has to do two things to earn lead jammer status. Number one, they have to earn a pass on the foremost in-play blocker in the engagement zone, having already, number two, earned a pass on all other in-play blockers. So basically, at the start of the jam, the jammer is trying to get past the pack. You know, they're going past. The jammer referee is sitting there and like memorizing. Okay, they've passed this person, passed this person, passed this person. They have to get past everybody. Now, notice when I'd said all other in-play blockers, I didn't say all other opposing in-play blockers. So they actually have to accrue legal passes past all their teammate blockers in the process too. Once they've gotten past everybody but the foremost blocker, then if they earn a legal pass on that person, they instantly are awarded lead jammer status. Something to keep in mind is this is confusing to some jammer referees, and we'll come back to it in a later lesson, but I want to mention it now too. Sometimes what happens is that jammer is stuck in the pack for quite a while, and the foremost in-play blocker is changing because they're not always at the front. And in the process, they've managed to pass all 8 blockers, but they're still in the middle of it. This person does not get to be lead jammer, or not immediately awarded lead jammer. They may still get it, but they're not at this point. The reason being is because we said A, you have to earn a pass on the foremost in-play blocker, having B earned a pass on all other in-play blockers. Well, you got B. You passed all eight players, but you have still not earned a pass on the foremost in-play blocker at a time when they are the foremost in-play blocker. Something to keep in mind, too, about lead jammers. You can't have 2 of them at once. So the first person, the first jammer that gets lead jammer status, boom, they're lead. The other person is not able to get it for the rest of the jam. You can't have 2 at the same time. If you ever see 2 referees pointing at 2 of them saying they're both lead, something has gone very wrong and there's some officiating error involved. In the case where both jammers become eligible for lead at exactly the same time, in this particular case, what do? You award it to whichever jammer is in front of the other. Well, what about if neither is in front? They're both right around the same, and the referees can't figure out which is which. In that case, you don't award it to either yet. You wait and you see which one pulls out in front of the other. That's usually, but not always, going to be the one that's to the inside of the track, just because they're going down a straightaway roughly even, but then when they reach a curve, the one on the inside is going to be able to navigate the curve faster than the one on the outside. But not always. Maybe this person's going faster and is able to get in front first. Either way, whichever one gets in front first gets lead jammer status in that case. A jammer will lose their ability to become lead jammer if they do one of 3 things. Number 1, if they or a teammate removes their helmet cover. Number 2, if the jammer receives a penalty. Note that this does not include a jammer who starts the jam in the penalty box from a penalty in a prior jam. That person is already considered to have gotten the penalty in the prior jam. It doesn't apply to this one. Now, when they get back to the track, if they then achieve all the requirements for lead jammer before the other jammer gets it, then they get lead jammer status just fine. Or 3, a jammer loses their ability to become lead jammer if they exit the front of the engagement zone without first earning lead jammer. The one exception to that is what we talked about before. If both jammers are side by side, they both earned the right to become lead jammer, but they're both together, they both exit the front of the engagement zone, you still kind of hold judgment on which one's going to be lead jammer till one pulls in front of the other. Something too, we're going to talk about star passes in a later lesson. A star pass, real briefly. So when the jammer takes off their helmet cover, remember now they can't get lead jammer, they hand the star to the pivot, and then they release that. In handing it, they release it. Now the pivot has it, and the pivot now becomes the jammer. This is an incredibly simplified version of the process. We're going to have an entire lesson on star passes later. But for now, it's enough to know that a pivot turned jammer, a pivot who has become the jammer because of a star pass, cannot become lead jammer. Remember, the original jammers sacrificed that ability when they took it off their head. So when they hand that cover to the pivot, and the pivot becomes the jammer, the pivot inherits that sacrifice, that they have given up the right to become lead jammer. Now let's talk about the pack. The pack is the largest group of upright inbound blockers from both teams, skating or standing in proximity. It's a kind of a long definition, so let's break this down a little bit. First off, upright and inbounds blockers. Well, we're going to talk about that a little more in detail in a minute, but basically, you're standing up, or, skating. I mean, you're upright, you're not down on the track, or down on the ground, and you're inbounds. You're not way beyond the boundary lines or something. And it includes its blockers. Jammers are never part of the pack. Blockers from both teams, meaning if red and white teams are playing a game, the pack must have members of both in it. If you've got all the red blockers over here and all the white blockers over here and they're far away from each other, there is no pack in that case. Finally, they must be two things actually. It must be the largest group. Sometimes you might have 2 white blockers and 2 red blockers over here, and 40 feet away from them are 2 more white blockers and 2 red blockers. Neither is larger than the other, and they both would be equally valid packs. Therefore, there is no pack, since none of them are the largest group. Finally, these groups, the people within the group must be skating or standing in proximity. Proximity means 10-foot links as measured at the center of the track. We're going to go into this in detail in a future lesson, but for now it's enough to know that they basically got to be moderately close together. If the pack is destroyed, there's a strict set of rules that go into effect to force its reformation. Basically, to tell the skaters, get your ass back, everybody. Get back together and reform the pack. If the skaters are not attempting to reform the pack, we're going to start shooting penalties fairly quickly until they do. They get a move on it when that no pack warning goes up. A no pack situation is when a single pack does not exist. Now, that could be because there is no pack at all. There's just nothing that could be a valid pack. Or it could be because there are 2 or more equal-sized packs. And as I said, the warning, no pack. The engagement zone, that's an area that stretches from 20 feet in front of the pack's foremost blocker to 20 feet behind the pack's rearmost blocker. Within this large area, this is where the bulk of gameplay takes place. The blockers must remain inside the engagement zone. A blocker who goes out of the engagement zone is given the warning, out of play, and they have to return to the engagement zone. Any upright inbounds blocker in the engagement zone is what we call in play. Basically, they're fair game to block, assist, and generally play derby. Out of play blockers, are those that are outside the engagement zone. They're not allowed to assist or to block or to generally affect the game. They have one duty other than just safety, not killing anybody in the process, but they have one duty: they have to get back in the engagement zone. The engagement zone also does not extend out of bounds. So if a skater is out of bounds, they're out of play, although the phrase out of play technically refers to skaters that are in front or behind the engagement zone. During a no-pack situation, all skaters are considered to be out of play. I'm sorry, all blockers are considered to be out of play. Jammers are always considered in play. Now, let's talk about blocking and assisting. A block is physical contact made to an opponent, or including any movement or placement of one's body, and all of this is done in an effort to impede the opponent's speed or movement. Basically, let's say you got a blocker here on the track. You're over here. You want to stop this blocker from moving forward. So what do? You come in and you block them. You try to knock them out of bounds, knock them down, slow them down. You want to prevent them from getting through. That's a block. A block could also be you going, ooh, I'm going to get in this person's way. I'm going to get in front of them over there, and I'm going to use, say, my back to kind of slow them down and such like that. Again, placement of one's body to impede the opponent's speed or movement. A positional block is a block without contact. For example, you just get ahead of the person, and no matter where that blocker behind you goes, you just keep getting in their way. There's no actual physical contact, but they can't get through because you're always in their way. Positional blocks need not be intentional, and it often happens in roller derby. A skater just gets in another skater's way or an opponent's way. That happens all the time. The initiator of a block is the person that causes the block to occur. So let's just say blocker A is just standing there. They're right in the middle of the engagement zone. They're just standing there. Blocker B, from the opposing team, looks at them, goes, comes right in and knocks them down. This person is the initiator. Something to keep in mind, a block can have two initiators. And that often happens with, say this is like the center point in the track. Both players just happen to want to go to the center track, so they start going right in, and they collide in the center of the track. They're not even necessarily aiming at each other. They're trying to take that position in the center of the track, and they both go in and they initiate a block against each other. So we have two initiators in this block. There's also something called counter blocking. Counter blocking is this. You're standing here, and I'm going, coming in there. Now, if I've got a lot of momentum, and I block you, let's just assume these are all legal blocks, but if I come in here and I legally block you, I'm going to send you flying. You are, maybe you're really big, and I'm not a big person, and you've really, in a great position, like a physical pose, and maybe you're able to take that hit, but a lot of the time, you're going to go. It's just too much momentum, too much force into you, it sends you flying. So what do? When I'm coming in like this, you turn, and you brace yourself, you aim at me, and you perhaps start moving back at me. That's called a counter block, because now you're picking up momentum. Besides the fact that it's less time for me to pick up momentum, so I won't be going as hard, some of our momentum is now going to cancel each other out. It's going to be one heck of a good hit if we both hit each other, but you're less likely to go flying because that momentum is just going to, we're both going to hit and kind of collide there. Positional blocks are held to the same legality as blocks, with one particular exception, which is that if a skater is out of play, they're outside of the engagement zone. Let's say we're both outside of the engagement zone now, and I come in at you, and you go, oh crap, and you come back at me. My block is illegal. Remember, I'm not supposed to be blocking you out of the engagement zone. Your block is legal. You're counter blocking, but we're giving you that one exception that you're outside of the engagement zone, so it's legal, because I'm not supposed to be getting you there in the first place. As long as we're in the engagement zone over there, we're held to the exact same standards. And those standards are generally things like, you can't use your forearm and push the person over. You can't put your head in there. You can't hit their head. We're going to have lots and lots of lessons and discussions on all those in the future. In contrast to a block, we also have assists in roller derby. An assist is any physical contact to a teammate that affects their movement. It's usually beneficial, but it doesn't have to be. Suppose, for example, there's a jammer right here, and I'd really like that jammer to go out of bounds. And I've got a teammate who's kind of, next to them. I might reach up, take the hips of my teammate, and basically fling that person into the jammer over there, and hoping to knock that person out of bounds. Now, I may knock that jammer out of bounds, but I might also send my own skater out of bounds. So it's beneficial for my team. Yeah, we knock the other jammer out of bounds. They can't score points out there. But the blocker that I threw out of bounds may not be terribly appreciative of the action over there because they went out of bounds. Maybe they didn't want to for some reason, or maybe they fell down because of me grabbing and kind of throwing them with their hips. So it doesn't have to be beneficial. Usually it is. It can be things like taking your jammer's hand, pulling on your jammer. So basically you're transferring your momentum to the jammer. So blocking and assisting must occur while upright in the engagement zone. There are a few exceptions to this. First, jammer on jammer blocking. Jammers are always considered in play. So if jammers are wandering around the track and they're on the other side, jammers can, they can start going after each other and trying to knock each other down. That's absolutely fair game. Now, they can't do it out of bounds. They can't do it while they're down, like kneeling on the track. But they can certainly do it, legally and upright and zooming around, anywhere on the track. That's just great derby. Fun for the audience, fun for the referees, fun for the skaters. Another thing, as I said, counter blocking is, while out of play is an exception. Passively assisting while straddling the track is also an exception. Straddling basically means you're both in and bounds in and out of bounds at the same time. An assist is usually active. You reach out, you grab the hand of that jammer behind you, you pull, they get your momentum. That's active. I actively took part in that. Passive is when I'm straddling the track and I'm just kind of coasting along, and the jammer reaches out, grabs my hips, and pulls. I didn't do anything here, but that jammer has just stolen my momentum and gone. I am the passive participant in this action. In this particular case, passive assisting is legal, even though I'm not technically in the engagement zone in that I'm partially. I'm touching both legal and an illegal point of view, but nevertheless, it is allowed in this particular case. There are a few other minor exceptions as well that we're not really going to go into right now. As far as blocking goes, you can legally initiate a block with any part of the body, and these are called blocking zones, with a few exceptions. The head. Blocking with the head is called head block. That was this hand signal. We talked about it yesterday. Blocking with your hands, forearms, or elbow. This is a forearm penalty. Hand signal this. Your legs, mid-thigh, and below. You cannot initiate a block with that. There, that would be a low block. I'm sorry, I take that back. It would be a leg block. That changed in the last version of the rules, and I still get a little confused. That's a leg block. A target zone is the part of your opponent's body that you're making contact to during a block. It is legal to block any part of your opponent's body, again with exceptions. The neck and head, basically anything above the shoulders. That would be a high block. The back of the person, we euphemistically use the expression between the bra straps. Basically, the back of the person, including their butt and the back of their legs. That would be a back block. And finally, their legs, mid-thigh, and below. That's off limits as well. That's the low block. Now let's talk about a few definitions. I've been using the terms inbounds, out of bounds, straddling, up, down, etc. like that. What does all this mean? Inbounds is basically you're in the track. We've got the outer track line, usually made of tape 2-3 inches wide. We've got the inner one over there. Referees tend to work on the out of bounds areas on each side. They should be working out. There's not just 10. They do work on the outsides of those. And anything that's on the tape line itself or between them, that's considered inbounds. Out of bounds is when you are touching beyond the track line with any part of your body. The exception, touching beyond the track line with one hand or one arm, and that's not just forearm. Some referees think it's forearm, but it's actually can be anything basically below the shoulder. Anything you have one hand or arm touching out of bounds, we give sort of a grace period for that. That's a get out of jail free card. That's still considered inbounds. It can certainly make some funny moments when a skater falls down and they're like touching out of bounds with all this, but nevertheless, as written currently, we consider that to still be inbounds. And again, one hand and or arm, not both. A skater is straddling the track when they're touching both in and out of bounds at the same time. A straddling skater basically gets the worst of both worlds. They're considered out of bounds. They can't actively initiate blocks or assists or anything, but they can be targeted for blocks over there. So they really can't defend themselves or do much more than just sort of adjusting their position. Instead, the blocker basically comes after them and can block them out of bounds. So it's not really where you want to be in a game. It's not an illegal place to be, but it's not a desired place either. A skater is down when they have one or both knees on the floor, or both hands, or they're in a prone position. Basically, they're just down on the floor. You'll know. Now, on rare occasions, you will find there's an exception here. One hand touching the floor is not considered down. So, like I said, it takes both hands on the floor. One hand is not down. This is basically kind of a speed skater exception. Speed skaters will get so low, they lean over so much when they're going very fast around the track that their fingertips are sometimes brushing against the floor. Basically, they're not down. We give them one at a time, can be touching the floor, and they're not down. Now, this can make for funny moments when you've got a skater. Imagine somebody in like say a push-up position where they're up on their toes and they've got one hand down. Instead of two hands, they got one down. Well, that skater's basically flat, but a couple inches above the ground with one hand or something holding them up. Nevertheless, they're considered up. It's kind of a funny quirk of our rules in roller derby. Now, they might not be able to get back standing upright without going down first, but in that moment, they're still considered up. A skater is considered upright in roller derby if you're not down. We don't have a definition of upright other than to say not down. Falling is considered still upright. You know, you're standing up, you're fine. You're falling, you're still up, up, up until bam. As soon as you have one or both knees on the floor, both hands, or in a prone position, that's when you're down. If you're not down, you're up. Let's talk about some other concepts. Game flow is the natural progression of the game, ideally without undue delays. Game flow is important because there are some penalties in the game related to game flow. In an ideal game, the game goes very smoothly with only clock stoppages, say like at halftime or the end of the game, as well as any timeouts or official reviews that the teams have the right to and or choose to use during the game. You can also have neutral interruptions to game flow. These are things that are not really legal or illegal, but they're necessary. You know, injury, for example, or the track gets torn up or something and you have to stop for track repair. You can also have illegal interruptions to game flow. And these would be, for example, like a team has used all its time-ups but manages to fool the referees into stopping the clock anyway for an additional timeout. If a team has 5 or few skaters after injuries, foul-outs, etc., the head referee has the option to declare a forfeit in the game. This is rare and is usually done after consulting with both team captains, but it does happen on occasion. Another concept. The teams and head referee may mutually suspend play due to safety concerns, problems with the venue or track, etc. For example, you're playing outdoors and it begins to rain. If you've ever roller skated on a wet track or on a wet floor, you basically know it's like skating on ice. You have virtually no traction to the floor, and it's exceedingly dangerous to play. I've heard of games canceled as well because they've discovered a wasp nest above the track, and they had skaters that were allergic to bee stings. There is no such thing. Here's another concept. There's no such thing as an inactive pivot. A pivot not wearing their pivot cover loses all privileges of being pivot until they again wear the cover. Now, this is as opposed to an inactive jammer that still maintains some of the perks and privileges of being jammer. We don't have inactive pivots. Either you're wearing it or you're not. If you're not, we're going to consider you a blocker until you put it back on your head. Finally, this isn't so much a concept as just a general bit of good advice. The rules in the game are not meant to be interpreted overly literally. Now, the rules are fairly well written. They're not perfect, and the people that write the rules will be the first to acknowledge this. They're pretty good, though, and when you're officiating the game, you should always consider the spirit of the rules, as well as like what is the impact on the game of a given situation. Because if you look too literally, if you're trying to be too pedantic about the rules, you can run into trouble and start really disrupting a game. For example, let's take the glossary definition for a captain. Captain says it's the skater identified via a visible C on their body or clothing. Well, what about if the skater on the back of their uniform, has their skater name and there's the letter C in it? Oh my goodness, it's like it's part of their name, but oh my goodness, they're wearing a visible C. That must be the captain. But wait, we have 6 skaters on this team that all have a C in their name somewhere. Gee, which one's captain? Could it be one of them, or is it the captain that happens to have a giant letter C that they put on their arm with pen? Well, yeah, it's going to be the person that puts the C on their arm with pen or has a big C kind of printed on their uniform or something somewhere. But nevertheless, if you're overly pedantic, you can argue, well, I can't tell. It could be one of these skaters that's got the C in their middle of their name. So therefore, we're going to have everybody with the C on their uniform who's not the captain cover up their name. And if they don't cover up their name, well, my goodness, now they're confusing the officials, and we're going to have to issue an illegal procedure penalty because it's a technical violation. This is really lousy logic. It's a really dumb interpretation. As referees, we have at least a modicum of common sense that we can apply. We know the difference between a big C on your arm or uniform and a C in the middle of your name on the back of your uniform. So when you officiate roller derby, you're going to encounter, on occasion, times where you're like reading the rules and you're like, oh my goodness, I think I'm having an epiphany. I have discovered something that nobody else has figured out. It's a interpretation that everybody else has wrong and only I have right, and we have to enforce it this way. Chances are, if you have discovered this, you've either discovered a pretty good loophole in the rules that they're going to need to fix, or no, you're actually interpreting it all wrong, and it's a really dumb idea, and you really don't want to enforce it that way. If you find something like this, talk to referees, talk to different officials, talk to non-skating officials, shop your idea and your thought around there and see what they say. Loopholes do get discovered in the rules. There have been some pretty good ones that people have found that they pulled out at the WIFTA playoffs, for example, and they've really surprised and shocked everybody. But on the other hand, more often these things are just really bad ideas. So don't be overly strict when considering the rules. Always try to look at what the spirit of the game intends, what legal play is supposed to look like, and is this really significantly different from legal play, and is it actually seriously impacting the game, or is it just such a minor technical issue that really isn't going to make any possible difference? 99.9% of the time, the rules should be enforced as written, but if you enforce the rules that 0.1% of the rest of the time, it can lead you badly astray. Always use your brain and common sense when enforcing the rules. This ends Lesson 4. I'll be back in Lesson 5 to discuss safety gear, skates, and accessories. Thank you.